Picture this. You're the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, standing at the dispatch box in the House of Commons, the most hallowed debating chamber in British democracy, and you decide the best way to defend your government's 13th U-turn is to crack a joke about the Kama Sutra. Not just any joke, mind you, but one that's so spectacularly unfunny that professional comedians, people who literally make their living from humour, queue up to absolutely savage you for it. And then, just when you think it cannot possibly get any worse, it emerges that you nicked the joke from a Conservative politician who used it 20 years ago. 20 years! That's not just bombing at Prime Minister's questions, that's archaeological comedy failure. Sir Keir Starmer's attempt at parliamentary wit has become the talk of Westminster, but for all the wrong reasons. And today we're diving into this glorious trainwreck of political humour, why it matters beyond just being cringeworthy, and what it reveals about a Prime Minister who's desperately trying to appear relatable whilst simultaneously drowning in his own U-turns. Quick favour, if you're already laughing, hit that subscribe button and smash the bell icon. Over 94% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It's totally free, takes 1 second, and it genuinely helps us keep making these videos. Cheers if you did. Right, let's dissect this comedy catastrophe. So let's set the scene properly, because context is everything when it comes to truly appreciating the magnificence of this disaster. Sir Keir was at Prime Minister's questions, facing off against Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, who was absolutely hammering him over the government's endless parade of U-turns. Now, a sensible Prime Minister might have defended the policy changes, explained the reasoning, perhaps acknowledged mistakes and moved on with dignity. But no, Sir Keir decided what the moment really needed was a risque joke about ancient Indian erotic texts. He turned the air blue, as they say, when he told the House of Commons, "Don't get me started on consistency. The Tories had 5 Prime Ministers, 6 Chancellors, 8 Home Secretaries and 16 Housing Ministers. They had more positions in 14 years than the Kama Sutra. No wonder they are knackered, they left the country screwed." Now, let's be fair for a moment. The setup isn't terrible. The Conservatives did go through Prime Ministers and Cabinet Ministers like a toddler goes through clean clothes. The instability was real, the chaos was documented, and pointing that out is legitimate political attack. But the punchline, the Kama Sutra bit, that's where it all goes catastrophically wrong. It's trying too hard to be edgy, too desperate to be funny, too obviously written by someone who thinks adding a mild sexual reference makes a joke automatically hilarious. It's the political equivalent of your dad trying to use youth slang at a family dinner. Technically, words are being said, but nobody's laughing with you, they're laughing at you. The professional comedians wasted absolutely no time in tearing this attempt at humour to shreds. Stand-up comedian Jeff Norcott, who's told his share of jokes over the years and knows what works and what doesn't, said, "I've told plenty of rubbish jokes in my time, but Starmer's Kama Sutra gag was Inception-level bad." Inception-level bad. That's not just saying the joke didn't land, that's saying it crashed through multiple layers of terrible on its way down. Norcott added what might be the most devastating observation. Joking about someone else changing position on the day you've done so for the 13th time is weird. And he's absolutely right. The cognitive dissonance of mocking the Conservatives for changing positions whilst your own government has just executed its 13th major U-turn is extraordinary. It's like criticizing someone for being late whilst you're actively sleeping through your alarm. But comedian Susie McCabe delivered perhaps the most savage takedown when she told Times Radio he probably thought the Kama Sutra was a curry until about 15 minutes ago. Absolutely brutal. That's not political criticism, that's character assassination disguised as comedy commentary. She's essentially saying Starmer is so awkward, so fundamentally uncool, that he wouldn't even know what the Kama Sutra was without someone explaining it to him. McCabe suggested the Prime Minister had been given a line by an advisor, which, if true, means there's some poor communications staffer somewhere in Downing Street who thought this was a good idea and is now presumably updating their CV. Now, here's where this story goes from merely embarrassing to absolutely mortifying. It has emerged that the exact same joke was used by former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan Smith back in 2005. 2005. That's 20 years ago. Duncan Smith used it when criticising then Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair for changing his views on the European Union. The line was, "The Prime Minister has taken more positions than the Kama Sutra." Sound familiar? It should, because it's essentially identical to Starmer's version, just slightly more polite and, crucially, 2 decades fresher. So not only did the joke bomb, not only did professional comedians queue up to mock it, but it turns out it wasn't even original. Starmer, or more likely his hapless advisor, recycled a 20-year-old Conservative joke and delivered it worse than the original. That's not political comedy, that's archaeological plagiarism. Let's talk about what prompted this comedy catastrophe in the first place, because the context makes it even more painful. Badenoch was absolutely on fire during Prime Minister's questions, and not in the good way if you're Keir Starmer. She was systematically listing Labour's U-turns with the precision of a prosecutor reading charges. Badenoch declared, "The reason he U-turns all the time is because he's clueless. He's blowing around like a plastic bag in the wind. No sense of direction whatsoever." A plastic bag in the wind. Now that's an effective insult. It's visual, it's memorable, and it perfectly captures the perception that Starmer lacks conviction and simply moves wherever political pressure pushes him. Badenoch continued with a greatest hits compilation of Labour U-turns, with Conservative MPs helpfully chanting U-turn after each one, like a particularly brutal parliamentary sing-along. The winter fuel allowance, U-turn. Waspy women, U-turn. The 2-child benefit cap, U-turn. Grooming gangs inquiry, U-turn. The family farms tax, U-turn. Digital ID, U-turn. Jury trials. And when opposition MPs shouted U-turn at the last one, Badenoch responded, "We hope so. I think that's going to be the next one." That's effective opposition politics. She's not just listing policy changes, she's creating a narrative of incompetence and weakness, painting Starmer as a Prime Minister who announces policies without thinking them through and then caves at the first sign of resistance. The government wants to be seen as tough on illegal migration. They want to project an image of control, of decisive action, of modern, innovative approaches to age-old problems. And, in theory, using social media to communicate government work makes sense. We live in a digital age. People consume information on these platforms. Transparency about enforcement activities could theoretically build public confidence. But there is a massive gap between theory and execution. What the government has actually created is a piece of content so tone-deaf, so obviously performative, that it has become a lightning rod for mockery. The dramatic music, the action movie editing, the whole vibe of it screams, "trying too hard." It feels like when your dad tries to use youth slang and somehow makes everything infinitely more awkward. How do you do, fellow border security enthusiasts? It is the governmental equivalent of that. And here is the truly delicious irony in all of this. The government launched this TikTok account presumably to control the narrative around migration and border security. They wanted to show strength, competence, results. Instead, they have handed their critics an absolute gift. They have created a focal point for every joke, every criticism, every ounce of skepticism about their migration policies. The comment section of that lone video has become a digital town square where the British public is exercising its God-given right to take the absolute piss out of authority figures who have made themselves look silly. The question we must ask is, what were they thinking? Did nobody in the entire chain of approval for this project raise their hand and say, "Hang on, might this come across as a bit daft"? Was there no moment of reflection where someone thought perhaps a social media account is not the solution to a complex humanitarian and political crisis? The fact that this made it through multiple levels of government bureaucracy and political oversight without anyone pumping the brakes is genuinely fascinating from a decision-making perspective. You also have to spare a thought for the poor social media manager who has been assigned to run this account. Imagine that job description. Wanted, social media expert to make illegal immigration enforcement engaging and shareable. Must be comfortable with constant mockery and single-digit engagement rates. Thick skin essential. Apply within. That person is currently living through what can only be described as a professional nightmare. They are the face of one of the most ridiculed government initiatives in recent memory, and they have to keep posting through it all with a stiff upper lip. What makes this entire situation even more absurd is the timing. We are in January 2026. TikTok is hardly new or cutting edge anymore. If the government had launched this 5 years ago, it might have seemed innovative, ahead of the curve. But now it just looks like everyone finally caught up to what young people were doing in 2019 and decided to copy it without understanding why it worked in the first place. It is the policy equivalent of your mum finally getting Snapchat just as everyone has moved on to the next thing. The broader context here matters too. This is not happening in a vacuum. The UK has been grappling with migration issues for years. The small boats crisis has dominated headlines. Different governments have tried different approaches, from the Rwanda scheme to increased channel patrols to international agreements. Some of these approaches have been more successful than others. Some have been controversial,